I led 8 men into St. Teresa's Catholic Church in Mombasa, Kenya, during Sunday morning Mass, with one objective: to take the communion bread from the priest's hands and destroy it in front of every person in that building, and to walk out with the evidence that the Jesus they worshipped could not stop us. But something happened at that altar that changed not just what happened next, but everything I had ever believed about who God was, who I was, and why I had been put on this earth. Have you ever been so completely sure of yourself that the moment God interrupted your certainty felt less like a correction and more like the ground falling away beneath your feet? My name is Hassan Yusuf Al-Masri. I am 29 years old, and on the morning of February 3rd, 2019, I walked 8 men through the main doors of St. Teresa's Catholic Church on Nkrumah Road in Mombasa, Kenya, during the celebration of Sunday Mass, with a single purpose: to take the Eucharist from the altar and destroy it in front of the congregation, to prove that nothing sacred lived inside it and nothing powerful would defend it. I had no idea that the Jesus I intended to destroy that morning had been patiently waiting for me, specifically to arrive at exactly that altar at exactly that hour. I grew up in the Old Town district of Mombasa, in a Swahili Muslim community whose faith was so woven into the fabric of daily life that you could not separate one from the other without tearing both. My father, Sheikh Yusuf Ibrahim Al-Masri, led prayers at the Mandri Mosque, one of the oldest mosques on the East African coast, and was regarded throughout the community not merely as a religious leader, but as a man whose personal integrity made his religious authority feel earned rather than inherited. He spoke slowly and chose his words the way a careful builder chooses materials, for their accuracy and their ability to hold weight over time. My mother, Safiya, ran Quran classes for the women and children of our neighborhood from our family home every weekday afternoon, and the sound of those recitations was the rhythm of my childhood more than any other single thing. In our home, faith was not practiced, it was inhabited. I memorized the Quran completely by the age of 15. The ceremony my father held drew men from 4 neighborhoods, and the prayers they offered over me that afternoon were the most meaningful thing I had experienced up to that point in my life. While other boys spent free hours at the waterfront or the market stalls, I was in the mosque library or sitting in my father's study with older men whose relationship to the tradition went back decades. I fasted Ramadan from 9 without being asked, added voluntary fasts before I was 12, prayed every prayer in its time in every circumstance. I was not doing this to earn something. The faith was the most solid thing in my life, and I was not willing to treat it as anything less. My father taught me about Christianity with the precision he brought to every subject he considered important. He was exact rather than hostile. The message given to the Prophet Isa had been altered by centuries of theological drift until what remained bore little resemblance to the original revelation. The Trinity was the most visible evidence of that drift. The Eucharist, bread declared to be the living body of Jesus Christ, was shirk in its most ceremonially elaborate form. By 20, I had joined a Muslim organization in Mombasa whose real work was countering Christian missionary activity in our community. We organized outside churches, challenged construction permits, confronted missionary teams. I was committed and believed every part of it was the most important work I could do. By 28, I had a degree in Islamic Studies from the University of Nairobi and was working as a program officer at an Islamic charitable organization in the city. I was engaged to a woman named Zuena, the daughter of a respected scholar from Lamu, a woman whose faith and intelligence made her the kind of person you instinctively trust with serious things. We were to be married in the summer. I had purpose, community, a future that was clearly shaped, and a faith I had never in my adult life found a reason to question at its foundations. I had everything that life was supposed to look like. Ask yourself this question. Have you ever lived so completely inside what you believed was the whole truth that the idea of a larger truth never once produced so much as a flicker of curiosity? The trigger came in January of 2019. A senior figure in our organization, Brother Salim, brought a printed newsletter to one of our weekly meetings. St. Teresa's Church had been running an open communion program, explicitly welcoming non-Christians to witness the Eucharist, describing it as the living presence of Jesus Christ in the bread, available to all who came with seeking hearts. Brother Salim set the paper down and said a church in the center of Mombasa was publicly advertising the worship of bread to our community, and that to say nothing was to say yes. The plan formed over 2 meetings. We would attend Sunday Mass. At communion, I would go to the altar, take the host, and destroy it in front of everyone. Let them watch nothing happen. Let the silence of the bread afterward prove the point. I volunteered before he finished outlining it. I had no idea that what I had just volunteered for was a meeting I had been invited to long before that afternoon. I chose 7 men. Jabir, a secondary school teacher whose composure under pressure I had trusted for years. Ramadan, whose family had lived beside a church compound in Tudor for a generation and who carried that proximity as a personal grievance. Omar, my closest friend since we were 9 years old in Old Town, who had followed me into every serious commitment of my adult life without question. We visited St. Teresa's twice as ordinary visitors, mapping the layout, the altar approach, the usher positions, the timing of the communion distribution. We would enter at the start of the service, sit near the front, and move when the priest began distributing. I would reach him before any usher could intervene and destroy the bread before anyone could prevent it. The plan was exact. Have you ever been so certain you were doing righteous work that the thought of being wrong never produced even a moment of honest consideration? The night before, I prayed tahajjud at 2 a.m. in my flat in Old Town, kneeling on my prayer mat in the dark and asking Allah for steadiness and for clarity of purpose. When I finished and sat back on my heels, something arrived in the room that I have thought about many times since. A stillness that was not simply the quiet of a flat at 2 a.m. A weight in the center of my chest that had a directionality to it, as though it was coming from somewhere rather than simply being present, patient and insistent in the way that something important is insistent when you are choosing not to pay attention to it. I named it as resistance. I told myself it was the predictable friction of preparing for difficult, righteous work. I lay down. I barely slept until Fajr. We arrived at St. Teresa's on Nkrumah Road at 9:30 on a Sunday morning in February. The air in Mombasa in February is warm and salt-laden, the Indian Ocean close enough that you feel it in everything. The church was a modest white building, a simple cross above the entrance, palm trees flanking the path to the door. An usher pressed an order of service into my hand with a quiet word in Swahili, and we filed in. The interior was cooler than the street, and full of a particular quiet that I noticed and tried not to notice at the same time. Incense and old wood and candle wax in the air, the smell of a space that had absorbed a great deal of prayer over many years. The ceiling was low and the room was intimate. Perhaps 400 people settled in wooden pews, a low hymn moving through the space with the gathered quality of something everyone in the room knew by heart. The altar was elevated at the front on 2 steps, white draped, 2 candles burning steadily in the morning light that came through the east windows. A woman in the second row from the front had her eyes closed and her lips moving in private prayer, and the sight of her concentration produced in me a discomfort I did not examine and immediately set aside. I kept my eyes on the priest and waited. The priest came to the communion station at 10:15. I stood, My men stood with me, 8 of us moving into the center aisle, fast and direct toward the altar. The congregation registered us, a wave of awareness moving through the pews, the low sound of a room whose understanding of itself has changed in a second. Mothers drawing children close, a man in the aisle half rising before something made him stop and bow his head instead and begin to pray aloud. The priest at the altar saw us coming, and he did not lower the host, and he did not move, and his face held something I was completely unprepared for. Not fear and not anger, but a settled, patient certainty, the face of a man who has been told something is coming and has decided in advance how he will meet it. An elderly woman in the front pew turned around in her seat and looked directly at me and said in Swahili, with no urgency and no drama at all, "Jesus loves you, son. He already knows why you are here today." I was past her. I reached the altar step. I reached for the host. That is when it happened. The moment that changed everything I believed about God. The heat began in my fingers before I made full contact. Moving from the direction of the host, entering my hand and traveling up through my wrist and forearm and into my chest with a thoroughness that left nothing untouched. Not the arguments I had prepared, not the certainty I had carried through the door, not the speech I had planned. All of it became briefly and completely visible as the small things they had always been, and underneath them something so much larger and more certain was making itself known with the patience of something that has been waiting a long time and is not in any hurry now that the moment has finally arrived. My hand reached the host and closed around it, and then my arm would not move. Not pain, not resistance from anyone in the room. The instruction departed my mind and arrived nowhere, and I stood at the altar of St. Teresa's Church in Mombasa with the host in my hand and my arm frozen in position and the heat in my chest continuing to expand. I looked at the bread. The light was interior and sourceless, a white gold glow at the center of the host that was generating rather than reflecting, steady in a way that the candle flames beside it were not steady. Jabir, standing directly behind my right shoulder, later told me he saw it clearly before his knees gave out. Ramadan described it the same way. Umar said it was the last clear thing he saw before the floor came up to meet him. One by one, my 8 men went to their knees on the stone floor behind me. The soft, successive sound of it, knees finding stone in sequence, while I was still standing with my frozen arm and the host in my hand and the heat in my chest arriving somewhere completely new. And then it came. Not a voice in the room, something interior and complete, arriving the way a name arrives when someone who has known you for years says it in a room full of strangers. Immediate, specific, already certain of you before it reaches you. I know you, Hassan. Every prayer, every fast, every night you knelt alone in the dark and gave everything you had to something you loved. I was there. I know you, and I have always loved you, and you are exactly where I have been waiting for you to be. My knees buckled. I was on the floor of St. Teresa's Church, weeping in a way I had never wept in my life and have not wept since. Not quietly, not with any composure or awareness of the 400 people in the pews behind me. The tears on the stone before I understood the feeling producing them. Not grief and not shame. Recognition. The feeling of finally, completely, accurately arriving somewhere you did not know you had been traveling toward. And the relief of it was so enormous, it came out of me as something that sounded like sorrow, because my body had no channel wide enough to carry anything larger. Around me, all 8 of my men were on the floor, some weeping, some completely still, one with his face pressed to the stone as though unable to lift it. The congregation had gone into complete silence. Then one voice began, a woman somewhere in the middle of the pews, praying low and steady. And another joined, and within a minute the whole church was praying together, 400 people in a sound that contained nothing of triumph and nothing of shock, only the sound of people who have been holding something open in hope for a long time and are watching it be received. The priest came down from the altar. He knelt on the floor beside me and placed his hand on my shoulder and waited with the unhurried patience of a man who knew exactly what was happening. When I could hear him, he said it quietly, only for me. He loves you, son. He has been waiting for you. Ask yourself this question. How do you explain the God you came to prove powerless, demonstrating with perfect personal knowledge of you that he has never once been absent from your life? When I could stand, I asked what I was supposed to do now. The priest helped me to my feet. Omar was beside me. Jabir was beside me. 2 other men remained in the building. The priest led us to the front of the nave and prayed with us. And in that prayer, I said the most honest words I have ever spoken in any language. Jesus, I came here today to destroy you. I have been wrong about you my entire life, and I did not know it until this floor. I know you are real. I know you were real before I arrived, and you will be real long after I leave. Forgive me for everything I brought to this altar today. Take everything I thought I was and make something truer from it. 4 of my men gave their lives to Jesus Christ that morning on the floor of St. Teresa's Church in Mombasa, Kenya. I was baptized 8 weeks later and given the name Cornelius, a man, the priest explained, who had sought God with everything he had through the wrong framework, and who was given the correct one in a single encounter that changed everything. Ask yourself this question. Have you ever received something that made everything you thought you had been doing finally make sense? I had no idea what that receiving was going to cost me. My father's voice on the phone was something I had never heard. Not the controlled authority I had grown up with, but something quieter and more final. You are no longer my son. You are dead to this family and to the name of Al-Masri. Do not call this house again. My mother sent my cousin with a box of my belongings, and he handed it to me without eye contact and left without a word. Zuena's father ended the engagement by letter. Zuena sent one message in Swahili, I don't recognize you in this, and then nothing. The organization I had served for 8 years declared me apostate and circulated the declaration. My position at the charity was terminated within 6 weeks. I received communications that made staying in Mombasa unsafe and left the city 4 months after my baptism. My father, my mother, my fiancé, my community, my work, my city, all of it gone inside a single year. But I gained everything that truly matters. I gained Jesus Christ, which means forgiveness I had no claim to. Peace with no floor or ceiling, and a love so specific and so constant it has never once varied based on what I brought to any given day. I gained a church family who cared for me in the practical, consistent, unglamorous ways that genuine love makes itself known. I met a woman named Rehema 15 months after my baptism at a Baptist congregation in Malindi where I had resettled. She was a teacher, the daughter of a Kenyan pastor, a woman who prayed with the directness of someone who had never doubted she was being heard, and laughed at things with a completeness that made every room feel more honest. We were married at St. Teresa's Church in Mombasa. I returned for that specifically. The priest who had knelt beside me on the floor officiated. 3 of the men who had gone down at that altar with me stood as my groomsmen. Rehema and I have a son. His name is Elijah. The first words he heard in the world were not the adhan. They were his mother praying over him in the delivery room, and I stood beside her with my hand on his head and could not stop weeping. I now carry the testimony of Jesus Christ to Muslim communities along the Kenyan and Tanzanian coasts and in Swahili diaspora communities in the United Kingdom. I had no idea on the morning I walked into St. Teresa's to destroy the communion bread that more than 70 Muslims would eventually come to faith in Christ through hearing what happened on that floor. I had no idea on the morning I walked into St. Teresa's with destruction as my stated purpose, how many people would find Jesus through hearing what happened there. I still write to my parents at Eid and at Christmas. I have received nothing back. I pray for them with the same faithfulness they first taught me, and I believe that the God who met me on a stone floor in Mombasa is entirely capable of meeting them wherever they are. If Jesus can love someone like me, a man who came to his altar with destruction fully intended, then there is no version of your story that places you past his reach. No matter what you have done or where you come from, he is not waiting for a cleaner version of your history. He is not asking you to resolve every question before you come. Look inside your own heart right now. Jesus is calling you right now, not when you are more prepared, not when the timing is more convenient, but in this exact breath and this exact moment. Will you let him in and discover what I found on that floor the morning I came to destroy him?